Brilliant. Thank you very much. We are getting towards the end of our time together. So last up, we have Josie Fraser, Head of Digital Policy at the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We all know that funding is fundamental to us being able to invest time in research and development, to be able to take time out from our business as usual, and to be able to push the boundaries of what's possible. Josie will be talking about the available, accessible and open grant requirements of the NLHF. This talk will look at why those requirements exist and how they help us collectively deliver public value, better represent and connect to audiences, and create lasting impact. Josie's keynote will look at the Heritage Fund's approach in the context of recent policy directions and recommendations relating to digitisation, digital resources and collections, and the challenges to our understanding of the digital commons and digital public good that current technological and social changes pose. So if you could join me in welcoming Josie Fraser for our final talk of 2024.
Hi, thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here with so many daredevils who don't care about the UK train infrastructure and what it does. They're willing to take their chances with the final keynote. So I really thank you a lot from the bottom of my heart for staying today. It's been an excellent day, so I absolutely understand why so many of you would. Also want to say hello to everybody who's watching online, live, and also hello future people. The past was great. I'm sure the future will be better, but I think that's a chat for later on when we go to the pub. I am going to talk about a few things today, depending on how much time I've got, so I might run out. I'm going to start with a nostalgic aside, get you all warmed up a little bit. Then we're going to talk about heritage audiences and the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Then we're going to have a little policy taster, not too much, so don't worry. And then we're going to talk about how the Heritage Fund puts those things and lessons into practice. And then if we have time, we've got a little bit of bonus stuff about inclusion that we may or may not have time for. But I will ask how much time I've got from someone. He's gone. Great, okay. Well, I'll try and find out from somebody if I've got enough time to carry on after that. First of all, just to start from, so we're talking about audiences today, and I know we've already had the tussle about if you build it, they will come, maybe they won't, maybe they will, how do you make sure that they do? But just for the purposes of my talk, I'm starting from the premise that access to heritage is something people really want. That's why the National Lottery Heritage Fund actually exists, because national consultations said we want to spend lottery player money on heritage and providing access to heritage to people. So we know that it's a want. We know from various research that's been done recently and further away that accessing heritage and engaging with heritage is actually beneficial and has lots of well-being benefits. And we know also that it's a human right. And I think it's really important to remember that the European Convention on Human Rights, to which the UK remains a co-signatory, enshrines the right to cultural access for everyone. And also, because we're talking about the UK and not just England and Wales and Northern Ireland, just to mention as well, Scotland also has specific laws around cultural access, which is really great as well. Okay, so I'm going to start with the tradition of asking people to raise their hands, even though I can't see who's raising their hands. We had a lot of talk about millennials earlier on, a lot of talk about Gen A earlier on. I'm Gen X, here to represent that generation. Can you put your hand up if this is familiar to you? Oh, not very many people. Great, bringing you new gifts. Okay, so in the 70s and 80s, the people that were there might remember that everybody just all the time thought about how we were going to survive the nuclear war. That's all anybody ever talked about. And a part of that was conversations about communications networks and how they could be more robust. So this is a really great diagram. It's from a guy called Paul Barron, who's one of the people that invented packet switching, and it looks at how to create communication systems that are more robust than the ones that were currently in operation there. So the first one you'll see, sorry. Why didn't somebody else say that to me? Literally, there's how many of you here? If that happens again, I'm going to expect a bit more of a prompt, a bit quicker, please. Okay, so now you can see it, hands up, who knows this diagram. Yay, we've got a few people, fantastic. Okay, so it's Paul Barron, and it's from 1964. And as you can see, it's very relevant to the kinds of things that we've been talking about today. It's also very relevant to the development of the web as a kind of communications network. It's also very relevant to types of audiences and what we mean by audiences. So you can see at the far left, I am expecting you to call out and help now if I make a mistake. A centralised model, which is typically, what many people are used to, both online and offline, in terms of their kind of getting their message out to their audience. Their audience are consumers, content consumers. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not here to say that's terrible, because I too might want to go to the Tank Museum web shop and treat myself to a pair of tank slippers. And I might not want to do anything else. I might not want to have an opinion about tanks, or I might not want to reminisce with somebody else about something else on the site. At different points in our lives, we have different energy levels and different interest levels. It's absolutely fine just to, I think, to be a content consumer. And I think we all exist on that continuum. But what the development of the web has done with this kind of moving towards a decentralised and distributed model is made it so that more people can share and create and put in content and can be content creators as well. So we go from maybe communities of interest over here to communities of practice over here, more active. That's not really the middle. Just ignore that as a middle bit, because it doesn't really work like that, but you'll have to use your imaginations. But I wanted to start with this slide because I wanted to first just say audiences. I spent a lot of time in 2007 working for JISC on community building projects. I was actually the chief community architect of a project called Emerge, and what that work was looking at is how can we create sustainable online communities in social media networks and landscapes. It's a really interesting thing, and by the end of that project I never wanted to hear the word community again. However, I did come round, but just to reflect that there's a continuum. We've already talked today that the language that we use from different sectors and different places is slightly different, but an audience can be perceived as passive. I'm taking it as also involving those content creators, especially when you think about how people are on the web, because the difference is that, yes, your particular website might not let them leave a 5-page rant about how comfy the tank slippers are, but there will be somewhere else that you can go. There'll be other commercial sites that you can use, and people do use. So to start off, what I wanted to think about in terms of audiences is maybe a little shift away from content, although obviously that's important, and I'm not disputing that, but to think about ownership of spaces and how people feel in spaces and how connected they are by to different digital spaces and environments. Okay, so I'm from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Who here has heard of the National Lottery Heritage Fund? Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. You can Google us, really easy to find. We're the UK's largest investor in heritage, we provide grants from between £10,000 to £10 million on a rolling basis right across the UK. We have offices and officers all across the UK to support and facilitate that. And we also have a very broad definition of heritage. So you'll see quoted on the slide, heritage can be anything from the past that you value and you want to pass on to future generations. So we're starting from a place that is quite broad, that is quite audience-centric in terms of, well, what do you think is heritage? And we've funded projects all the way through from huge projects that are maintaining wetlands and peat soils in spaces to projects that are talking about the history of grime music. So everything in between we're doing. This is some of the areas that we cover. So this pie chart isn't what we cover as a whole by percentage of our total funding. This is by inclusion in the Digital Skills for Heritage project that I'll talk about in a bit, but it's percentage of the sector involvement in the projects that ran. So there's libraries, archives and galleries, industrial and maritime and transport, culture memories, intangible cultural heritage, land, sea and nature, historic areas, buildings and monuments. And also a chunk of that, 10% of that, is about sector support specialists. So not people who provide generic services that can be used by heritage professionals, but people who provide specific services to heritage organisations, in this case, digital services and organisations. So we have a UK-wide sector. We have a kind of please tell us what you value definition of heritage, and we have different and we have quite a lot of different knowledge domains and areas that we cover. And what else do we look like? So this again, these are taken from the Digital Skills for Heritage project. We did a couple of national benchmark surveys, sorry, not national, UK-wide benchmark surveys of digital skills across the heritage sector in the UK. And from that, we got some really, really interesting information about what the sector actually looks like. So as you can see here, or maybe not because your eyesight's probably as bad as mine, and it's a very pale slide, but what this slide is telling you basically is that 68% of the sector is volunteer-led or 10 or less employees. So that's quite significant in terms of when we're thinking about audience and what we're thinking about engagement and when we're thinking about value for our investments as well. Right, okay, so I'm going to go on to talk about the limitations of that training in a bit, but I'm going to now talk a little bit about policy. Hands up in the room if you're a policy professional. Oh, wrong conference. Okay, I will be as quick as possible, so as not to lose your interest too much, because I do appreciate it's Friday afternoon. Okay, so I'm going to start with I'm just going to be a little snapshot of policy, and it's going to be very, very UK-centric, but it is related directly to digital collections, management and preservation, and access. So really actually very critical for our sector, because this is what people are talking about and what's going on and what people are thinking about in terms of, okay, well, I may as an individual institution offer this or be able to afford to offer this, but actually what are we as a nation, as the UK, offering to our publics? So I'm just going to pick out a couple of things from this one. This is the Digitisation Task Force, not to be confused with the Digitisation Task Force. So if you Google UK Gov Digital Task Force, you get the other one. And the other one seems to be an organisation, it's like an inquiry or something, that has basically decided they want to get rid of paper-based shares. And they like the word digitisation. But it wasn't that one. It's a different one. It came from DCMS's Culture is Digital white paper. So again, kind of, you might not be interested in policy, but actually policy does prompt activity. It does move things in certain directions. It does get organisations aligned around particular things. And it was basically designed to have a look at how we could look at infrastructure and economic models for preservation and sustainability. And it was really looking at, well, what could a national collection look like, and what could we do to better digitise our things in the future. So it's looking at quite a big range of things. It was led by the National Archives, and it came out with a range of recommendations. I'll just point out a couple here. So digital centres of excellence are supported. That one's a really interesting one, because when you think about centres of excellence, you might think, oh, that's a department in a university that does something, and they've got some specialist things and they do some activities. But really, what the group were thinking about in terms of that was much more about the need for infrastructure and services for the sector. So it was a recognition that there are many, as we've seen, 68% of organisations across the sector that are not necessarily set up to be able to deliver the kinds of things that they would like to deliver, and as a nation we would like to be able to have in a representative collection as well. Economic value models for collections and collection data should be developed. That's a really interesting one for some people, me included. And it's come up a couple of times today about, well, what are the value of those collections? How can we kind of think about that? I'm also really interested in economic models around, in particular, openly licensed and public domain works. There's a lot that we don't know about, which to me is quite exciting, because it means there's lots of opportunities to try new things, to develop new areas of work. And the other one that I'll point out is encourage funders to include preservation and sustainability. And obviously, National Lottery Heritage Funds, that is bang on the money for us. It's one of our investment principles, is around preserving heritage. So next up, towards the national collection. Again, this is a big policy, multi-partnership investigation. It was a research investigation over 5 years. It was around £19 million worth of investment by UKRI to look at this idea of the unified digital collection for the UK. Got mentioned by the keynote this morning. I don't think the idea really has ever been to look at how can we have one platform to put everything in, or one access point for everything, especially when you think back to what actually everything is and the different areas that are represented by all of those different types of collections. But the kind of recommendations that came from that very much talk about things like interoperability and standards, accessibility and access, so that actually tools can be developed, people can much more easily create collections from different places and bring in and put together their own collections for different things. Also, really interestingly, the first recommendation was about broadening the scope of what is in the collections, because we have many gaps in the collections, we have many histories that haven't been told, and many heritages that are vital to the UK that are not well represented and documented. So it's great to see that that was their number one thing. Rights and rights management, I've talked about, and again, preservation to safeguard collections. European Commission I'm going to mention super quickly, because I thought it'd be good to get a little bit away from the UK, although the European Commission is still a very UK-centric policy domain. But for people that aren't keeping an eye on Brussels, data sovereignty and public digital spaces are really, really high on the agenda in terms of what people are talking about. They're not being talked about so much in the UK at the moment, but there are people who are interested in those ideas and looking at it. Again, we're going from the focus on content to the focus on spaces and environments and potentially services as well. The European Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles came out in 2012, which enshrines a whole lot of stuff about people's access and the way that the public should be able to make use of digital. And it looks at really human rights in digital environments. So human rights, we would hopefully all agree are a good thing. And they aren't a different thing in online environments. Obviously, the affordances of digital are different to the affordances of physical, but the principles apply across whether you're in a digital space or in an on-site space. So Open Futures defines digital public spaces, which is a really interesting concept, as digital services and platforms outside of the control of commercial entities, which adhere to democratic and collective forms of governance. So that's a super interesting definition, and you can already think of a few platforms that we have that fit with that definition. So government services, for example, but you can also think of many that don't conform to that definition, which are super useful, especially for the types of communities that we're talking about who don't have access to lots of equipment, lots of resource, lots of techie people, who just want to be able to do things in a quick and easy way and to get information out and to make those connections. At the moment, there is a massive imbalance in terms of who owns those platforms that people are using. And I'm not saying that those platforms are bad, but if you're thinking about it from a public service point of view, it makes no sense to only have platforms that are there at the design of the commercial sector and for the commercial sector. And we all kind of know what's happened with X over the last year or so, and it's a salutary reminder that those spaces, however much we feel they are our spaces and we love being in those spaces and we've got loads of happy memories about those spaces, they're not our spaces. And we can't vote over those spaces to look after misinformation a bit better or anything else. So, Open Futures is a European think tank, and if you're interested in this kind of thing, do Google them, because they do some really interesting stuff about public digital spaces, but also about AI as well. They've done some really interesting things around that. Okay, so the policy's over. Policy's over, everyone. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, so our digital requirements. So as a funder, how do we negotiate this? How do we negotiate the fact that we work across these different knowledge and practice domains, the fact that we work across different governments in the UK, the fact that we work across different types of digital output, all the way from, sorry, okay. It's Friday. How you feel is how I feel, but I have to stand here and entertain you. So thank you for your patience. So we've produced all kinds of things, from 3D models to audio files to collections. You all in this room are very well aware of the different range of things that make up digital collections and archives. How do we deal with that as a funder in terms of what we've just talked about, in terms of the fact that we know that organisations need support and don't necessarily have it, they need capacity and don't necessarily have it, and that we have an ethical duty, like everybody here, to make sure that the things that we invest in are not lost to the future. You know, that the whole purpose of us is to support precious heritage that is precious to people, that they want to take into the future. So the issue of kind of digital disappearing is a big thing for us. So one of the ways that we kind of look at those kind of recommendations around, well, how can we get from where we are at the moment to this place where, you know, things are more secure, things are more interoperable, things are more accessible. We have these high-level requirements. So we ask that all digital outputs are available, accessible and open. We keep it kind of simple. This applies to you if you've got a £25,000 project or a £10 million project, and it applies to you across all of those domains. So we have to keep it quite high level because otherwise it would be unworkable. But there is obviously a level of detail behind it. But availability, we ask that the public can have unfettered access to the digital materials that we invest in. We ask that accessibility is taken into consideration and standards are adhered to. And we also ask that digital outputs are, when they're not in the public domain, are openly licensed, unless there's an exception for those things. The other way that we kind of tackled some of these issues around, well, how do we support the kind of move towards a more secure, more representative digital collection, is around the Digital Skills for Heritage initiative. And again, this was another result of the Culture is Digital white paper. And from this, we did quite a lot of different projects. There will be people in this room that have worked on it, I'm hoping. If you worked on one of these projects, can you put your hand up? Okay, someone. Thank you. I know Anra was as well, but she's left early. But quite a few people did. We invested in 51 sector organisations and professionals to deliver the programme over a 4-year period. The survey data that I showed you that is illustrating the benchmarking digital skills for the sector, we surveyed 8,200 plus people for that across the whole of the UK and the whole of the heritage sectors. And we delivered 242,000 hours of synchronous, so in-person training, most of which was online because of the pandemic at the time, and created a huge legacy of resources as well that are available in English and Welsh to support the sector. But one of the things that we really learned from this, well, I really learned from this, and I think other people did as well, is that there will always be a massive demand for digital skills, and there will always be the digital skills support will always be really, really welcome. We were massively oversubscribed with everything that we did throughout the whole of the 4 years. However, without that kind of service infrastructure piece, it's a pretty much risks being a tied in, tied out kind of thing. Because if you're thinking about it in terms of those small organisations that don't have many people, that they might not have people that are there all the time, people might come and go. They're not necessarily interested in becoming digital professionals at all. That's not why they're in their community of practice to start with. So there is a missing piece at the moment around infrastructure and services. I think some organisations managed to look at that. For example, the Museum Data Service are doing a great job in kind of looking at some of that. The Archaeology Data Service too are doing some of that work. There are lots and lots of gaps though still in terms of what provision there is. I just wanted to mention audience impact because some of the projects that are on that website you might not have heard of, and they are really interesting in terms of generating audience, and we had really high success of exceeding and increasing audience increased targets. And they're over 2 projects. One was about digital volunteering. So we define digital volunteering as volunteers that are either online or are either carrying out some technical task or are working at distance or are doing both. So quite a wide thing, and we funded quite a lot of projects around that. So we've got a really rich range of examples of how organisations can make use of digital volunteers and not just physical volunteers, and really make the most of those opportunities. And the Connected Heritage projects, they were a similar kind of cohort, but they were looking at how organisations can work in partnership with other organisations using technology. So collaborative working via tech of all different kinds. And again, both of those cohorts massively increased their new audiences. I'm going to finish on the takeaways. We haven't got time for the bonus material, unless everybody wants to give up going to the pub, which I'm not convinced you do. But just shout if you do. Or laugh. Just laugh if you do. No, I won't carry on after this one. But I'll just finish with the takeaways. So this was really from the last 4 years of work. So we know that we can achieve significant progress with large-scale targeted interventions. We did some really big projects and they scaled really well. So there are things that are applicable to lots and lots of different circumstances. I think the Digital Volunteers is a great example of a programme that was kind of really, it really worked in so many different contexts and provided a lot of success for a lot of different people. Future digital initiatives can be more ambitious. So we exceeded all of our targets in the Digital Skills for Heritage programme. By our standards, it's a very small programme. It was like £4 million over a 4-year period. But we still managed to over-deliver on our engagement statistics and on our participation targets. Accessibility planning and delivering is improving, but very, very slowly. There's a great organisation that you may know called Vocalise. They were one of the projects in our digital volunteer cohort, and they had 61 deaf, disabled and neurodiverse volunteers review over 2,000 heritage websites to see how accessible and how inclusive they were. And they created a benchmark and toolkit around that, which is super useful too. And really interesting in terms of who came out top in terms of accessibility and inclusivity in their websites and who didn't. And that piece of work looked at changes over the last 5 years, I think, in terms of accessibility. And it has got better, but the bad news is it's got a tiny bit better. It's not really got that much better, so we've got a huge amount of work more to do around that. Leadership development is still critical and still needs work. We ran some leadership programmes, very, very well received, and they did have kind of big impacts on the organisations that they were working with. The sector is weak on understanding digital costs. So that's come up a few times today. It is something worth really thinking about. Obviously, from our perspective, we're reviewing grant bids, and it's very easy to tell sometimes that people are not good at thinking about the costs involved in what they want to do. And obviously, that puts your project at a greater risk. And there's a high ongoing demand for skills development, as I said. Alongside, and particularly in terms of the whole IP piece, what we've found repeatedly is that people are not very well equipped to deal with intellectual property rights or copyright or those kinds of areas, and that more support is needed around that. Okay, I'm going to finish there because we don't have time for the digital inclusion bonus. Down the pub maybe. But hopefully you found some of the talk interesting, and I hope that we can collectively think about what our focus is, as well as individual organisations focused on engaging our audiences, creating our content, managing our content. Be really good for us to think as a community too, collectively, about that infrastructure piece and about that space and environment piece online. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much. They've gone home. Mics have gone home.
Oh, yeah.
Hi there. The question was about one of your bullet points on not understanding digital costs. I mean, that's a whole presentation in itself, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think many of those...
It'd be great to understand just some highlights about what you mean by that.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Just would be great to understand some highlights or some quick summary of what you mean by that.
Yeah. Okay, difficult to give a quick summary, but basically the sector has, by and large, a bad understanding of all costs relating to digital. If you think about if you think about the kind of issues already facing the majority of the sector that we're working with and we're supporting, that 68%, they very often have no digital experience. A lot of the projects that they're doing are their first experience of learning to do something. So they're going gung-ho into a big digitalisation project, never having done anything before. So, without the kind of support around them, they're struggling to get the costs right in the first place, and then they're struggling to maintain things in the longer term, which is obviously a big problem for all of us. In terms of other costs, I think, organisational leaders often, not always, but often underestimate digital costs. They often see this narrative of, digital will save you time and money, and actually, maybe it won't save you time and money, but maybe it will make things more accessible, more efficient, more secure, things that we all actually value, but not necessarily at a super cheap cost over time. And, that's where business planning comes in. But I think a lot of senior managers are not necessarily digitally confident. So where they are great at business managing and looking at business cases for lots of different things, they may not be as strong in terms of digital and infrastructure costs.
Hi, hello, Josie. Thank you so much for an excellent presentation. Great way to end the day. When you asked if anyone worked with policy, no one raised their hands. And I just wanted to ask, what do you think about it? Do you think that there is a barrier for policy participation of the heritage sector? What do you think are the problems that the sector faces in terms of participating in cultural policies and legal kind of regulation in various different subjects like IP, for example, and AI? And what do you think are the barriers?
So I think there will be people in this room, and I know you're one of them, who is very interested in regulation and kind of legal practice around digital. So you don't necessarily need to be a policy professional to do that. The people will have their own personal and professional interests. I think the question is not necessarily about policy people coming into this forum. It's the same as most forums. How do you ensure your community is diverse so that you are benefiting from the different experiences, knowledge, know-how, understanding that make up a strong and interesting community? And that's the problem for everyone, but I think it is something that you can do something about if you focus on that.
Thank you.
Jaron from Numico. I was just interested in the accessibility audit that you did, that you mentioned earlier. Is that something?
The vocalised one.
Yeah, is it vocalised? Is that published?
Yes, it's online, and there's a brilliant toolkit that they produced that goes alongside it, so you can have a look at how they ranked the organisations that they looked at. It's called Heritage 2022, I think. But if you Google vocalise and accessibility audit or vocalise National Lottery Heritage Fund, you'll be able to find that.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Josie. Sorry. I'm Helen from the Gardens, Libraries and Museums at Oxford. I think we were one of the largest respondents to the DASH survey in 2021. And I was just thinking about it, and two of the big takeaways I remember were where our data chimed with the cohort data, was that people in the sector were only motivated to learn new digital skills when they had to solve an immediate task or problem. And the second one was that most of the digital skills that people either had or wanted were not specific to heritage. And I just wondered now, and those two things at the time seemed quite linked to the pandemic and how we were sort of operating. And I wonder now, 3 years on, do you think those are still true? And has the dial shifted on digital skills at all?
So that's a great question, thank you. I think it is still true because digital is mainstream business practice. And if you take the temperature of any organisation across the board, you are looking at people with many different job functions, many of whom are using digital for various generic things or needing to do things, many of whom don't really want to spend all their time doing that. They want to do things. I think that's okay. And I think as long as you've got willing evidence that they're keen and willing to have a go at things, that's fine. That's healthy. There is layers across all sectors in terms of kind of digital literacy understandings, and there's a kind of a general, generic digital literacy that we all need to be able to do online banking, to be able to buy stuff on eBay, all of those kinds of things. Then there's kind of more professionalised uses of technology for specific work tasks. And again, that's quite generic. And then you have the very, very specialised stuff. And we have a lot of that very specialised stuff in our section because we've got some really, really exciting things going on in 3D, in AI, in all kinds of places. And that they're not comparable. So when I've done digital literacy surveys of sectors before, you have to lump them in because otherwise you're not representing the whole, but it is a different thing in terms of those specific skills as well. So no, I'm not surprised by that. Probably still would be the same. You'd get the different answer if you were looking at that sector. We didn't just look at people who were responsible for digital. We looked at everybody in the workforce. But thanks for taking part. It's really appreciated. Some great statistics came out of that, some great data, and we really use that evidence to inform our funding.
Yeah, so just time for one more, and this one's come in from Slido. What mistakes do you see funded project teams make over and over again with regards to digital sustainability?
I think one of the most heartbreaking issues is that they want to do everything themselves. And, you know, they're small groups, they're in that 68% majority. They want to build their own server farm, they want to hire their own technical staff because it turns out nobody else knows how to do anything with the server. They want to try and do too much, really, and they underestimate the actual work that's involved and the level of skill that is involved in some of those things. We've got a really good guide around digitisation that looks particularly at looking at this problem, that looks at, well, what can you do if you've got no money? But and I think that's kind of one of the things that's one of the biggest problems that we have. The other problem is that we'll have projects that aren't end to end. So you'll have digitisation but not preservation, or you'll have digitisation but not access. So, you know, we're keen for projects to look holistically. We might not be funding the whole of their digital journey, but we're very keen that they are recognising that it's not just about digitising a load of things. There's other stuff that needs to happen as well.
Well, we are on time, so yeah, if you could all join me in thanking Josie. So that's it for this year. Thank you so much for being such a brilliant audience. Do please join the MCG discussion list and be part of our ongoing community and conversation. So I'd just like to close really quickly by once again thanking our sponsors, National Lottery Heritage Fund, Numico and Manifesto, without whom it would not be possible to offer tickets prices as affordably as we have done this year. And to our corporate members, and once again to the venue for hosting us in the lovely think tank this year. We are also on the lookout for a venue for next year, so if you reckon you could take on Muse Tech in 2025, please do get in touch either with myself, Georgina at onefurther.com, or via the website. And finally, to our brilliant committee and wiser volunteers, so one thing it's worth mentioning is that all of our papers are peer-reviewed by a volunteer community that's outside of the committee itself, but the committee itself, Ed, Russ, Pete, Sarah Duman, Sarah Middle, Alec, Graham, Mark, Michael, Matt, Faye, Natalie, Nia, Sia, Amelia and Libby. Now we have a little bit of a tight timeline to get out of this particular building, this particular room, but you'll feel free to spend a bit more time in the big room where we're all eating lunch earlier. But we do have also quite a healthy tab behind the bar at All Bar 1 Birmingham New Street. So that's conveniently close to the station. And hopefully there we can continue the conversation. Thank you very much.